Hi, Alan Cox here. Hey, almost every organization that I work with has a version of this story. You bring in a contractor, they need global administrator access into your tenant, just temporarily to help with a migration or a project or some issue. You assign the role, the work gets done, the contractor leaves, and 6 months later, they're still a global administrator because everyone forgot. Privileged identity management exists to stop that exact scenario from happening. This series isn't about locking people down, it's about giving administrators powerful access only when they need it, with visibility, accountability, and governance built in. Over the next several videos, we're going to talk about privileged identity management, how it can help, how it's set up, and how we can extend that to even some RBAC roles inside of Microsoft 365, like Purview, etc. So sit back and let's get started and talk about privileged identity management. That's going to be our focus. So let's get started. All right, here I am in the entra.microsoft.com portal. And by the way, you can get to privileged identity management from the traditional portal or the older legacy portal, which is portal.azure.com. And then once you're there as an administrator, then you can go in and you can you could search for privileged identity management or PIM. It's now called Microsoft Entra Privileged Identity Management. But in any case, that's where you can find it there. I really like the Entra dashboard. Get used to it because it does present a lot of valuable information just here on these cards. But where we're going to focus is throughout a large part of this series here is going to be here. Now you see I have this favorited, and so I can go to favorites, and there's privileged identity management. But if we're just getting it for the first time, go to entra.microsoft.com. We're going to scroll down here to identity governance or ID governance, and then from there we are going to go to privileged identity management. Now you do need an Entra ID Premium P2 plan for privileged identity management. They're starting to roll some other things with some ID governance and things like that. But in any case, that's where we can get there. I have that starred out, so we've got that favorited. But this video, this part one of this first video, we're not going to go into as much of the the configuration as much as we are just going to kind of walk through a little bit and talk about some of the basics of privileged identity management. The whole idea behind privileged identity management, as we talked about in our intro, was so that you can have controlled access to accounts, or rather roles that could hurt you the most, like global administrator, security administrator, conditional access administrator, compliance administrator. These type of roles are especially important that you want to have some safeguards around. Look, best practice for a global administrator, especially we'll talk global administrator, but a best practice is, number one, it should be cloud built. It should not be a synced account. You shouldn't have some account on-prem that is synced into the cloud and then assigned a global administrator role. That shouldn't happen. And also, my opinion is that account should not be a licensed account. And also, it should not be. I go into accounts all the time, and if I'm doing an assessment, and I'll look, and one of the first things I do is see how many global administrators they have. And I can be talking small businesses, or organizations that aren't really even that large, that may have 13 or so global administrators. and so I always ask, why is that? And so anyway, um, but anyway, that's so we need a way to manage those accounts, and when they're no longer being used, so the concept behind privileged identity management is a just enough access and just in time access. So in other words, most organizations, very rarely do you need a global administrator for almost anything. So even a contractor, if a contractor's coming in to do purview work, example, they don't need a global administrator role. They may need purview administrator, compliance administrator, or something like that, but they're not. So least privilege along with just in time. How long do we need this role? We don't need this role for, permanent, and we'll talk about that a little bit more detail as we go along. And we'll cover a lot of this stuff around privileged identity management. So I'm going to pop in here. We're going to talk about my roles, my requests, approval requests. We're going to get into all of that information. We're going to talk about Microsoft Entra roles. We're going to talk about groups, and especially when we get into our video that we're going to talk about how we can enable RBAC type roles. So things that are in, because you're going to see different roles inside of Purview than you might see inside of Entra ID here. For example, I'll just give you a quick example here. If we look at roles here, if we go to Purview, we're going to see, and I'm going to sort these out here by name. If we go to, let's just take a look at Purview. Okay. There's workload content administrator, but there's no purview administrator. There's no, there are some, so we see compliance administrator, right? But let's take Exchange here. Let's say organizational messaging approvals, data source, but there's no org management like on the Exchange site. So there's some differences here that you'll see, but we can still use PIM for that, and we'll go through that later. Now I want to talk about some basic concepts here. So the basic concept is, if we look over here to the right, we will see active and eligible. And if I'm doing an assessment for an organization, I may come in here, and I can do this in any number of ways. But I'm gonna go in here, and I'm gonna look at the roles. I'm gonna look at all these roles. But I may sort it over here by clicking this up arrow, up and down, and I can see that there are 3 active global administrators. So that tells me there are 3 global administrators in my tenant, and I can tell you that's true. I happen to be one. It's not necessarily best practice to use. This is a demo work environment that I use. It's not necessarily best practices to use, my account that I work in day out. You should have a separate account. Also, you should have some sort of an ADM account or some account where you do administrator work. It should not be your typical licensed user account that you use. I'm not doing that in this environment. Probably should, but I'm not. So anyway, so one of those global administrators, and I do have another global administrator account that's just a global administrator, and then I do have a Glassbreak account. Now I got a directory reader. We can see these are active. Now what active means when we're talking privileged identity management is that is an account that is permanent. Basically, it's active. And it is it's assigned account. So for example, if we go to the admin center and I were to assign an account to somebody and give them a role of whatever, let's just go over there. If we go to the administrator account here, and we go to users here, let's take one of my users here. And let's just do Leon. And if I were to take this account and say roles, and I manage this role, and I were to say, yeah, I'm gonna give Liam, and I can show all by category. Okay, so different accounts here. So and I were to say, global reader or global administrator here, that's an active role. Now I can do it here, and I can also do it through privileged identity management here, and we'll see all that. But active basically means that account has that role pretty much all the time. Now, we can limit some things on how long active is available and all of that, but that's just the premises of it. That's how we've done it often. Eligible means I have the capability of elevating to that role for just in time access. So what does that mean? That means that I day to day, my account, the account that is eligible, is not an administrator of any kind, whether it's whether it's any of these administrators, depending on what my eligibility is assigned to. So we'll just say global administrator. My account is not that, but if I need that account, or rather, if I need that level of access, I can then promote to that level just in time by doing a simple request saying, elevate this account. It then could go through some workflows of approvals. We're going to cover all of that information. So that's the basics there. So if I hop out here to this, what is privileged identity management? Learn article here. It is a service in Microsoft Entra that enables you to manage, control, and monitor access to important resources in your organization. These resources include resources in Microsoft Entra ID, Azure, and other online services, 365 and Intune, etc. There's a video here explaining it. Reason to use. Organizations want to minimize the number of people who have access to secure information or resources because that reduces the chance of a malicious actor getting access, unauthorized user, inadvertently impacting sensitive resource. Okay, license requirement. There's a link to the license requirement. It provides just-in-time, assigned time-bound, require approval if we have that built into it. We're going to look at all of that in future videos. We can enforce multi-factor. We can use justification and notifications. We do access reviews. We audit. All of this is auditable. Okay. So here are some of the terminology. So eligible, a role assignment that requires the user to perform one or more actions to use the role. If a user is eligible for a role, they can activate the role when they need to perform a privileged task. Okay. Active, a role assignment doesn't require a user to perform any action to use a role. It's assigned. It's active. Okay. And then there's activation, the process of performing one or more actions of a role to become eligible for. There's assigned, a user that has an active role assignment. Activated, a user that has an activated role assignment performed the actions to activate the role and is now active. So it's activated that role. Permanent eligible means that a role assignment where a user is always eligible to activate the role. And what that means is, and there's a duration there. So what that means is, how long is this user eligible for the role? Doesn't mean that how long does the user have the role, but how long are they eligible to promote to that role? So going back to my contractor story, if we have a contract that, let's say they do need a global administrator, but we know this contract's only going to be for 2 months. Well, then I may make them eligible, time-bound eligible here for 2 months. But they're eligible, but when they elevate their access time might be, 8 hours, or it could be, 24 hours at a given time. But they're eligible to promote for a period of 2 months, if that's the case. So hopefully that makes sense. Just-in-time access is a model in which users receive temporary permissions to perform privileged tasks. That's what we're talking about, that just-in-time. So we can set that on each role. Each role can be different. So a global administrator may say you only can be that for 2 hours or 4 hours or whatever. Different roles can have different times. That's just in time. How long can you have the role once you elevate? Now you can extend that. You can ask for, you can, once it deactivates, you can reactivate. I mean, doesn't mean that, that's your only window, but it's just to limit the amount of time somebody has access to that role. And of course, the privilege of least privilege, a recommended security practice in which every user is provided with only the minimum privileges they need to accomplish the task. Okay? So, if there's anything else we need here. So here's kind of how it works. We're going to walk through all of these settings. We don't need to worry about this so much. We're going to talk about this, and then there's approver, denier workflows. We're going to kind of talk about that just a bit. All right, so I think we're good there. Now, there are some roles in which privileged identity management can't be managed in PIM, or roles that cannot be managed in PIM. And they are basically an account administrator, service administrator, and co-administrator. You can't manage these. Are classic subscription administrator roles in privileged identity management. Okay, so there are a few of those accounts. So that's that. Now back into here. Again, we're going to talk. We're going to talk a lot about these roles and these assignments, and we will use the example of a global administrator as we walk through our demos here. But if I were to click in this global administrator, it's going to tell me we can see eligible assignments. So who is eligible to promote to a global administrator? Right now I have nobody is eligible. However, I do have an active assignment. So I, as I mentioned, am a global administrator, active, direct assigned. That means I've just been given access not through PIM, but through like the administrator, the admin center. I've been given direct access to that. Okay, so it's assigned and it's permanent. That means it's not like I have permanent, assigned access for 6 months or 3 months. It's permanent until somebody actually removes the access or changes some things. Then I have a glass break and then another global administrator account. The point is that these are all assigned. We're going to be talking about, and I don't think I have any expired. We're going to be talking through setting up eligible, because that's really the premises, is that you want to manage your eligible role. You want to manage your elevated roles, global admin, security admin, conditional access administrator, all those ones that can really hurt you the most. You want them to be managed inside of privileged identity management or PIM, and you don't want them to be active assigned. You want them eligible assigned. Okay, and so we're going to talk through that, and then we're going to walk through the configuration and setting this up, because if we look at the settings for global administrator that we'll talk about next in our next video, we can see all of these settings that we can set on how long the activation is, whether we're going to allow justification, require MFA, all of those settings we're going to talk about. That will be in our next video. Well, that is basically the high-level overview of a little bit of privileged identity management. I hope this has been helpful, and thanks for watching.